Somebody's jumping in.
Yep, there we are.
Hey everyone, how's it going? Welcome to today's Force Friday event. Today we're going to talk about different tricks to create depth on the page. This is actually a really,
Whoops.
really powerful,
Sorry, Mike.
yeah, no worries. This is a really powerful tool, right? The idea of, creating depth on the piece of paper, right? As you know, in my force books, there's force, there's form, and there's shape. And this depth thing actually crosses over form and shape. I'm not really going to go deep into perspective. I think that's worth holding on to for other conversations. Um, but a lot of the stuff I'm talking about is really like the shortcuts to perspective, basically. So it does help to know perspective. But even if you don't know perspective that well, what we're going to talk about today is some fast ways, like I said, of creating depth or space on the piece of paper, right? So we want to be able to get like, the hand really big and the head really small, right? And vice versa, and how to do that. What's interesting is I don't see, I see there's a ton of you guys here and likes, but I don't see anything in the chat going on. Hi, everyone. Do you, Diego?
Yeah, the chat is open. People are talking. I'm super excited for the lesson today. Hi, Noah, me too. Olivia is saying thumbs up. Hey, everyone is saying Jaime Munoz. Hello. Saying Joe R. Jonathan Solomon say hi. And you said hi, everyone.
Weird. I don't see anything on the chat today. Okay. All right. I'm going to lean on you, Diego, to help out with chat. Okay.
Don't worry, I take care of it.
Okay. All right.
At
So
least
let's
I'm
get
gonna try.
started. First of all, of course, as we've said in the past, if we can get to that 150 in likes today, that would be amazing. We do have something that we want to give away to you guys. So we want to try to hit that 150. And also, you know, try to subscribe and hit the bell. That'll give you notification as to when we're coming in with new videos, and so you have more access to what that schedule is and you're notified about it. You may have seen, or maybe not, I just posted a premiere that we're going to have with Josh Hunter Black. That'll be on the 11th of July at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. Yeah, check out Josh's Instagram. It's Josh Hunter Black, written with no spaces, and just put the whole thing together, and you'll get to see what his artwork looks like. So there's going to be an awesome 1-hour interview between he and I, and he's going to be demoing at the end of that. So that's a new thing that we're going to be now bringing to this Force channel. We're going to try to stay on the cadence of showing these interviews once a month. Okay. All right, so what are we talking about today? We're talking about depth, right, and how to create depth. So the first thing I'm going to talk about is foreshortening, right? And interestingly enough, I think this is actually a really important subject, and I get asked about it pretty often. Um, the key to foreshorten is it's right in the word itself, right? It's that you need to shorten things, right? So whatever you're drawing basically gets shortened. And through the idea of shortening the object that you're drawing, you end up getting more depth out of it, or this perception of depth. Now, why is that? Well, my guess would be because our mind is accustomed to knowing how long things typically seem, like how long somebody's arm might be relative to their torso, right? It's a lot of proportion going on with foreshortening. So the idea of shortening is we're playing with proportions, and through the shortening, we end up perceiving that there's depth on the page. So I put this little diagram together to present this idea. So here's a three-dimensional cylinder. And you can see this arrow on the side is basically showing the height of the cylinder from on its front surface, from the top edge to the bottom edge, right? And you can see how tall it is. As soon as I start manipulating the camera to foreshorten this, right, to change the perspective, you'll notice that that surface gets a lot shorter, right? You can see I lined up all of the bottoms of the cylinder here. So the top is what we're shrinking down relative to that bottom location, right? So look at how vast already the change in height is, or distance, by me shortening the tube to make it seem like it's coming out in perspective, okay? And then by image number 3, you can see in that front space just how much shorter it has become. And by doing that again, it makes my brain think it's leaning towards me because it's shorter. And then last but not least, look at how tiny the front surface is, right? So purely through the idea of distance, does our brain start thinking about foreshortening, right? So I thought I would sketch for you like a couple of areas of the body to demonstrate this. So let's see here, get my brush out. So let's say we have an arm, right? I'm going to stay really simple. Right around here is the elbow. I'm gonna try not to put too much anatomy in this. So here's an arm, right? And we have it at this height, or length, I should say. Let's stay with length. Whoops. So if I want that to come out, right, all I need to do is start thinking about shortening. Now I want to have a I want to have sort of a like a pin put in one part of this arm to lock it down. So in this case, I think I'm going to use the shoulder because that is usually like the pin, right? It's like that's where the anatomy is locked down from the arm to the torso is in the shoulder. So I'll stay true to this. And what we'll do is we'll start shortening everything else up, right? So I'm going to cut this in half, right? I'm going to take the elbow line and we'll move it up here, right? Let's do a little higher like that. And I'm going to take this line and I'll move it up here, right? So now all I've done is change distances, right? I've taken this from here to here and this from here to here, right? And that's enough for me to say, okay, now I have this new foreshortening. I'm going to start drawing the arm at those distances, right? And just the mere fact that I'm going to keep this about the same with the hand. So let's say the hand is like this. The mere fact that this arm is shorter starts making my brain think, what's going on? Is this coming out at me? I'm trying my best to not use a bunch of the other tricks that you'll be learning in today's session and just deal with the simplicity of the shortening. But shortening alone starts making my mind think something is going on because I have a perception of what, like I said, an arm's length is. Now, I don't even have the reference of the body here, right? But if I did, that would make it even more clear because I would have something to relate to. So I can now say, I'm going to put the elbow here and I'm going to put, let's say, the wrist where this is and start drawing this arm. Elbows here. You can see it starts to, it's either like, man, this is a really tiny arm and it's really short, or it's starting to come out towards me, right? So the point I want to make here is just very simply by shortening something, I'm going to start alluding to the idea that there's depth. Is this super successful? No, it needs some of the other tricks, I think, to really help it, which I'm going to be sharing with you and Diego's going to share with you to push this even further. But I want you to just be aware of the aspect of when you're drawing purely the X or Y distance, this is Y, let's say, and this is X, of something getting bigger or smaller starts giving you a sense of depth, right? And it's very, very easy to fall into the trap of flattening things out. So here I've made them shorter. Typically what happens when students are drawing a model is they'll do the opposite. They'll make things longer. So the photograph will actually have foreshortening in it, or the real model in a classroom would have the foreshortening in it. And a very common challenge or issue that I see students come across is they make things longer, right? So I tried to grab some photos to show what this might look like, right? So here's a photograph from the photo library at drawingforce.com. And I'll normally what I see students do here, I'm just going to quickly sketch in the model's body. Any questions over there, Diego, yet that I need to answer?
Yeah, just one question there. Why Sahil said when drawing from imagination, how to avoid excessive foreshortening. But my reply to that was, why would you? Why would you like to reduce the foreshortening? Because foreshortening is gonna get a lot more depth into the
Right.
drawing.
Yeah.
So if there's a specific reason why do you want to reduce that,
Mhm.
just let us know, and I'll let you know. And somebody else asked you, Swenley and Ritunjay here today. Ritunjay is recovering from a throat ache he was having, so he's not able to speak like a long time. So
Yep.
he's resting. And Swenley, I think he's going to be here a little later. But we are here with Mike, so if you don't want us, we can leave.
Yeah, no, there. Hopefully, Swenley will show up in about 20 minutes or so. And to Diego's points, we're trying to save Murtunjay's voice, so he'll be okay by next week. But thank you for asking, guys. This pose, this is a great example of one where I see foreshortening get flattened out. So Noe, our model here, her leg is of a very specific distance, right? So I want to be aware of the hip, right, to the knee, right? So that means there's a certain distance between these two, whatever X may be. I purposely made X longer here, okay? So I brought it out. And even if I angle it down, right, I can bring it down at the same angle that she's at, but I increase the length of it, right? I do this. Well, that immediately robs her of space, right? It robs her leg of the drama that it has. And going to, Diego's response to the live chat, typically you want to create depth. Depth is a tool for drama, right? It just creates more interest in your drawing, creates more drama. So unless you're somebody who wants flat shape design, which is possible, right? That might be your style. What you're looking for typically is how to create more space. So in this case, again, with this image of Noe the model here, I just want you to be aware, this is a common situation that I'll see happen. Her leg might only be really this short. I'll see the student make the leg too long. They're thinking, I'm going to draw the leg in its more true length. This is a great example again of, how your brain lies, basically, right? It's like, oh, I'm looking at the model, but you don't draw what you see, you draw what you think you see. And what you think you see is a leg. So you draw the length of a full leg, right? What we want to do here is we want to actually bring the leg in to about here, right? And by bringing the leg into here and bringing it down, well, that creates more drama, right? All of a sudden,
Mike,
yeah,
there are two questions,
yeah.
and you kind of answering one right now. One is how do we keep proportions accurate while foreshortening, and the other one is when should a beginner or anyone start drawing from imagination?
When should they start?
Sorry.
When should they start drawing from imagination?
Yeah,
When?
when should a beginner or anyone else start drawing from imagination?
So the proportion question, man, I think we'll do probably a full hour on proportion at some point in time. There's a lot of different tools that help me track proportion. One of them I've mentioned today, which is this whole idea of X and Y, right? You just want to be aware of how tall things are relative to how wide they are. And once you do that, and you even think of your X and Y, notice the angles that get created between those 2 points, right? So that's one. And that again is a really great opportunity for you to be aware of the foreshortening, is you want to be aware of these proportions and distances, right? Because as we've shown today, even with the cylinder, distance does actually equal space. not only does it just create the flat proportions of the body and their measurements, but it creates depth, right? And you want to be really, really sensitive to those amounts of space, right? So what I'm trying to get to here is it's very common to look at the model for your brain to lie and say, I think it's this long, because it's not accepting how short something is. The common trap is to make things longer. So when you see that there's foreshortening or something going away in space or coming towards you in space, allow that flag or that warning bell to go off in your head to say, there's foreshortening here. Things are being shortened. And I need to be really, really aware of how short is, right? That's what we want to keep track of. Okay, so I brought in a couple of other photos to share with you that I know were also common issues that I've seen on the site. Here's a reference of Andy, right? Anytime the model is leaning in a direction towards or away from the camera, again, it becomes a really obvious and simple problem of not dealing with the foreshortening, right? So here's the top shoulder of Andy, and here's his waist, right? Here's his knee, here's the other knee, right? What I would normally see here is students draw the model like this. Let's see, we got the pelvis here, got this leg. So I'm just gonna flatten out the torso. I'll try to nail the rest of the foreshortening, right? There's the ankle. Like so, right? So look at how drastically I stole the drama of the pose, right? Let me get rid of this word foreshortening here. This is, again, the common challenge, right? You can see I basically lifted Andy's shoulder, right? This shoulder right here is here, and I lifted this shoulder all the way up to here, right? And originally we had the far shoulder down here, and I lifted that shoulder up to here, right? And you can see what that does to the pose, right? All of a sudden we lose this drama of space, right? Andy was very aggressively like leaning towards the camera with a lot.
Mike, can I add something?
Yeah,
For those of you who didn't watch the previous stream we did, we talked about iteration, and this is a really nice point to be aware when you are iterating. Here,
yeah,
you can see how Mike purposely make the mistake of the shoulder, and if you are aware of that, in the next iteration, you're gonna fix that. So if you didn't watch the last stream, take a look at it. There's a lot of tricks there to learn. Keep going, Mike. Just want to say that.
yeah, no, that's a great point. So this is one of the things that would come up in iterating is, oh man, I stood him up too much, right? And we want to get Andy all the way down here, right? So all of a sudden now we have something that looks more like this. Right? And that suddenly starts to create drama, right? If I were to wrap around Andy's body here or try to create perspective, right? You can see the perspective would be like this on this pose. And that is nowhere near as dramatic as his body being like this, right? So you can see how in one version he's standing up like this, and in the other version, the one that's more like the photograph, if you see my camera for a second, you know, he's leaning down like this, right? And we want to capture that lean. So, you know, be aware of just how vertical you're making something versus how short, right? And in fact, here's my Cintiq pen, right? And talk about the foreshortening with the tube that we talked about earlier. You can see how it's at this length, but by foreshortening, it looks like it's really small, right? Like the pen itself is tiny when it's really this long. So that's really the concept of foreshortening. I just want you to be aware of height and distances from one place to another. When I'm doing it, lots of times I'll be aware of certain markers on the body to help me with that. So I'll look at, for instance, the shoulder, you know, and like where here, let me zoom in on this. I'll look at the shoulder. I might look at the muscle over there. I'll look at the crease down here, right? And I become aware on the flat two-dimensional plane of the paper, like, what is the distance from here to here? What is the distance from here to here, right? What is the distance from here to his other shoulder? This is all stuff that's happening in the back of my mind just very quickly, and I'm assessing that, right? Because the closer, again, the distances get, the more foreshortening there is. And still to this day, I mean, I've been teaching drawing for 25 years now. I still allow that little warning bell to go off when I realize, okay, there's depth here. I've got to heighten my senses towards foreshortening and make sure that those distances are as close together as they truly are, right? Because I know my mind wants to push them apart. It wants to flatten them, right? So, just stay on top of the foreshortening. I think I have one last photograph I brought in here to show you. Yep. So this is a great example again of a ton of foreshortening, right? So what would I do? I would say, I'm going to look at where that shoulder is. I'm going to look at where that hip is, right? They are really close. My mind doesn't want to believe that. My mind's like, oh my God, this has a lot of perspective, and my brain would normally take all that perspective and want to start flattening Andy up into a standing pose. And instead I have to be aware of those distances, right? So I have that, I've got his shoulder, right? We've got his back, right? I've got his hip here, and I'm like, this is right that crucial moment of me buying into what my eyes see versus what my brain wants to tell me. And I'm like, I really don't need to go that far to get the hip in there, right? It's really close. And I have to trust that, right? I just have to trust it. So, trust your eyes, be aware of the foreshortening in a pose, right? And that's how you'll start creating lots of depth, right? You can see where his knee is, all of a sudden the hip to the knee is a pretty far ride, right? Like I have to get to the knee, I have to get over to the calf and down to his foot. Those are all pretty long distances. I'm looking at this to this, right? And then I'm looking at this to this, right? And look at how small, again, this to this is. So such an odd reference, right? Tiny torso, giant legs, right? Look at his legs in totality. Just doesn't want to make sense to my brain, right? My brain doesn't want to believe that, but there it is. You can see it in the photograph. So trust your eyes, right? Be aware of the differences in distance from one sort of anatomical marker to the next. I'll close with this in that when it comes to these measuring moments, I usually use joints. So it might be like the top of the shoulder to the pelvis, usually the pelvis to the knee to the ankle. With the arms, I'll go from the shoulder to the elbow to the wrist. Those are all the moments that give us the most foreshortening, and I'm constantly aware of those distances, okay? All right, any questions on this before I move on to our next trick? Anything?
Everything looks fine in the chat. People are asking for fisheye perspective, which I think image is it's really kind of that. It's like
Yeah,
really
it is.
extreme perspective, like vanishing points are really close together, so
Yep.
we can see that. If you want to see more about that, there's another stream we did before about perspective itself, so you can watch that. And there Platypus say the brain is so stupid, why can't we just draw what we see, what is the problem?
It's true.
And yeah, that's a big deal.
It is true. Yeah, it's a great practice to just get your brain out of the way. You really want to learn how to see, but you want to then further that by understanding what you see. But learning how to see, man, that is a huge skill. You just got to get to a place where you can see the truth, right? Because again, your brain wants to lie. It wants to, my gut is it wants to calm things down. It doesn't want the amount of chaos that is actually going on around you to occur. It makes it easier for you to focus on other things. So number one was foreshortening. Number two is scale. So we can actually take a look at this same photograph. And scale makes a huge difference, right? So let's go back to my drawing over here, the arm, right? Remember I said, we get distance out of this, but there's other tricks, right? So, man, now that I have scale at my disposal, right, I can say, I'm going to think about the joint of the shoulder, right there, as like a small circle. You can make it a triangle, a rectangle, whatever makes you happy, right? But there's a small shape there. Then I want my elbow, and then I want the wrist, right? So look at that. That immediately, scale is so powerful, right? To me, that immediately makes me start thinking about perspective. I don't even know, I don't even need to know perspective that well. If I understand scale and its power, you're immediately going to get depth on the piece of paper, right? So here, now I'll draw the same arm. Right, and draw scale. And here, let's even make this really big. All right, let's say here's the thumb. Right, and now look at what happened. Right, now I'm going to remove those circles because they looks like I'm implying roundness, but I'm not. I just want you to see what happened with scale. Right, look at the difference between, let's see, drawing 1 and drawing 2, right? So I have the foreshortening that I pulled over from drawing 1, same distances of foreshortening, but I played with scale. And all of a sudden, this arm is like really popping out of the piece of paper, right? Super, super dramatic. So if we go back to our photograph, right here, the way I teach scale in the books is, especially the character design book, because I talk about something called the bounding box pretty often, is just put down an abstract shape, as I was saying, with circles or squares. So look at just the difference in the feet, right? It's like if I just put a box around the general proportion of one foot to the other foot, look at how much bigger the closer foot is and how much smaller the further one is. Now, on the human body, we're mostly symmetrical, right? So that's actually great when it comes to scale because, I have 2 hands, right? And if all of a sudden one hand is bigger and one is smaller, right? You can see in my camera, look at the difference in scale, right? You know that they're around the same size, right? So all of a sudden, for one to be really big and the other one to be really small, drastic, drastic change. It gives us immediate depth. Why? Because there's comparison. Comparison is what's giving me the depth. If I just have one giant shape, it doesn't mean anything. It's the fact of having a comparison of a shape get from small to medium to large that makes a really big difference, right? So here we have Andy's feet, and one being smaller as a shape immediately means it's further away. Now, another scale thing to be aware of here is the size of your hands to your feet. Hands are typically a little smaller than feet, but not this drastically, right? Like look at the size of Andy's hands compared to his feet, right? And his head and his face, right? So much smaller than the size of his feet, especially this close foot. So my point here is purely just having abstract shapes helps you create depth through comparison, right? Small is further away and big is closer. We could exaggerate this pose even more and say, well, I'm going to draw Andy's hands like this and his head like this, and I'm going to make his foot like this and the other one like this, right? Like, wow, look at that. That looks pretty darn insane, right? So I'll try to draw into this, okay? So we've got his face tucked in here and his arm is coming up and it's fluidly moving like this to this hand. Right, and then we have his back. I'm going to put his hip about here. I don't want to lose too much of that foreshortening idea we just talked about, right? And then I can get his leg in here and I'll get his knee here. All right, so his knee is like this. And then I'm going to get down here to his foot. All right, let me take these boxes away. You know what? What I'll do is I'll turn them on, but I'll knock them back so I can see it. Okay. All right, so we've got his rear end over here. And make this foot like just gargantuan, right? Then we've got the other foot. we've got his arm poking out over here with a little fist, a little face tucked in there. So now look at what I did, right? Off of this reference, I took the same idea of the poses, the same forces of this pose, and look at how much more drama I created out of it through foreshortening and through scale, right? I gave this much, much more depth than even the photograph had. I think somebody before mentioned the fisheye thing. Fisheye would cause this as well, right? You would have much more drama towards the center of the lens, and things would get dramatically smaller as they move away around the edges of the lens, right? So in this case, the lens is down near his feet, right? So
There's
that's
a
why,
question
yeah.
here, Mike. Sorry to interrupt you. It says, would you consider this a good exercise for perspective for shortening? First, yeah, it's a good exercise, but you have to be aware that maybe this goes a little bit advanced. Like, I don't know what stage you are in your learning process, right? But this is kind of more into design stuff and pushing things and talking about shapes, and it goes a little further away than just a learning perspective for shortening. Okay, so yes, it's a good exercise. Be aware of what you're learning right now. I don't know, Mike, if you want to add something to that.
Yeah, I mean, to me, in the end, like, we're all learning how to draw. I'm not teaching you anything dangerous, right? So go ahead, play with it, right? It is, to Diego's point, it is an advanced idea. What's really happening is perspective is the reason for these tricks. And what I'm doing is I'm coming in from the back door and I'm saying, these are things that perspective causes, right? It causes foreshortening, it causes scale, right? So I'm giving you the effects of what perspective accomplishes. So even if you don't know perspective that well, I got to tell you, as soon as you take comparative anatomy like feet or hands and you play with size, you're going to get depth. There's like no doubt about it. It's 100% foolproof trick. Does it help to know the perspective? Sure, because I could mess things up. I could choose to make some things bigger and others smaller that really don't work relative to perspective, like you might break the rules by accident. But go ahead, try it. You know, you're going to see immediately how much space it creates. Most people learning how to draw, this is one of the biggest missing components to their work, is you draw figure drawing after figure drawing after figure drawing, but they're all really flat, right? Like the space in between the front of the figure to the back of the figure is really narrow, right? It's like really small, but the model and the poses take up way more space. So, you know, give yourself the liberty to draw some scale. It could be very simply just saying, I want to get from the shoulder to the elbow, and just knowing that the shoulder is of one size and you're going to make the elbow a little bit bigger, right? All of a sudden gives you more depth, right? And it doesn't have to be, this is a super dramatic example of it. Doesn't even have to have that much drama, right? It can just be this. And already my brain starts to think, oh, this is coming out towards me, which is how you see the world. You know, the world is not flat. Space is actually way more dramatic than you anticipate it to be until you become aware of it, you know? So if you do this, my suggestion would be deal with comparative anatomy, draw some abstract shapes on your piece of paper, and see if you can kind of fill them in. The idea, the reason I like the shapes, the idea behind having a shape on the piece of paper versus purely trying to draw the scale change without it, is it makes it a lot easier. It's a way, your brain has the ability when it sees a box or a circle or whatever to fill it. It'd be a lot harder for me to exaggerate this without the box. The box is giving me the proportions and my mind has the ability to go, okay, fill that box, right? Because it's already there. When it's just on white piece of paper and just floating out in the middle of nothing, it's way more difficult, you know? Okay, so in Mrityunjay's absence, he generously sent a video over, though, of him drawing. So I thought I would share that with you guys because he was going to cover scale today. And I want you to see how he handled this, okay? So let's see here. Let's bring this up. Okay. So I'm going to scrub through this, all right? And let's talk about it and mark it up as we go. So far, right, we've got the body and the head we didn't have any scale at the very beginning. Right here, there's no sense of scale, right? It's hard to tell, right? It's not, this hand, it's starting to feel a little big to me because look at the circle of it. It's almost as big as the head. Now, your hand is almost about the same as the front of your face. So once you get there or larger, right, that's a common proportion element of the human body. Once it gets bigger than the head, you know you've got scale going on, right? So, but here's where the magic starts to happen, right? What Mrityunjay does here is he says, okay, I've got this shape here and this shape here. Wow, that's pretty dramatic, right? Look at the scale change. If we just took them as two circles, put them next to one another, right? Look at the difference in size. It doesn't look like much of anything when I put them next to one another, but as soon as it becomes two hands, right, and they're placed like this, well, then all of a sudden my brain starts seeing, oh, that's a hand, that's an arm, it's connected to the body. That's the other arm and that hand. Wow, that hand must be really, really far away, right? Okay, let's keep scrubbing here. So we've got the two legs, right? You can see we've got one knee and another knee, but I don't know if there's enough information there yet. This hand now is starting to get fleshed out, right? So we can see just how big it is, and we see the other hand, right? It's huge, huge scale difference. Okay, so now we've got the knees, right? So going back to the hands, right? We've got this giant circle compared to this small circle. Now we've got this knee, and look back here, right? We're also going to get the feet, so we can see that foot relative to that foot. Yeah, and you can see that I wasn't even aware of these circles he drew at the end. Notice how he's saying, look, I'm aware of the hands, and he measured that against the foot as a distance as well, right? And this other foot, there's his line of perspective and comparison, right? And then when you take all of it away, you can see again just how big and small all the different circles are, right? So any questions on scale before we move on to Diego's portion of the workshop?
Nothing there yet, but Swanley's in the house.
Hey,
So, and
I don't think his camera is on and everything yet. No.
no, he's not even on Zoom. He's on the chat on YouTube.
Oh, okay, cool. Yeah, so weird. Sorry, guys. For some reason, I don't see the chat today, so I'm not sure what happened there. Okay, so to recap, now what we have is a combination of foreshortening and the power of foreshortening combined with scale, right? Scale really starts to make our brain believe in the idea of depth, right? I want to show you one last thing before I hand it over to Diego, because as I said, this is really what I'm teaching you are tricks or shortcuts to perspective, right? Let me just get all the way back here. So the way this is working is like this, right? This is our horizontal line. Anything that's at that line is going to be at its smallest because it's the furthest away from our vantage point, from our eye. And as things come towards us, right, they go from being small to being big. And our brains are trained to know this. Now, the trick is to be aware of what is below your eye, right? Here's your eye, and what is above your eye. So as we go down on the piece of paper, right, the lower you go down on the piece of paper, the bigger the object becomes. So Andy's feet, that worked really well, right? Because we could say, well, we have a foot that's like this big, and over here, maybe we have a foot that's like this big, right? Here's like a wedge shape for the foot, right? So we buy into that. We understand our brains are accustomed to looking down at the flat plane of the ground and understanding things get smaller as they go away. Like think about when you drive, right? You're very aware of the fact that cars that are far away, closer to the horizontal line, are smaller. And as they get bigger, they get closer to me, right? So the opposite happens as we go up from that line. So keep that in mind, right? Now something would be small here, and as it goes up higher on the page, it's going to get bigger, right? So it's going to be bigger here and smaller here. For instance, clouds, right? Clouds would be smaller towards the horizontal line, and they get larger as they come up over our heads. So same thing with a model. You know, if you had a model standing, you'd have one arm or hand that gets bigger and closer, and the other one is smaller and further away, right? So just try and be aware of that. You know, have fun playing with the idea of foreshortening and playing with scale. And we're next week, by the way, we're going to do a critique hour, right? So it'd be awesome to see some of you practice these exercises and submit that work. I would love to bring that into the critique since that's one of the topics we've covered over the last 4 weeks, and see how you guys are doing with it, okay? All right, Diego, I think I'm done. I'm going to hand it over to you, okay?
All right.
All right.
Okay, I'm sharing my screen right now. All right. So I hope everyone can see my screen.
Yep.
And well, there was a question there if it's better to use photos or live models to draw this and to start thinking about perspective and depth. And the truth is that when you're using a camera to take a photo, you can use like fisheye lens, like we talked before, and that will create a more exaggerate depth and perspective, and thing that goes really far away, really small, and the closer are going to be bigger. So that's the help on photograph. But when you're thinking about live models, you could do that with your head. So imagination there is really important. Understanding of perspective is also important because you can create that depth in your mind. So you're sitting there on your horse, drawing horse, and you have the model like, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 meters away from you. But you can use your brain and your mind to get closer to the figure and then create that depth. While like the example Mike just did with those with the feet and the head of the model. So you can use both. They're all good. And actually, when you're drawing like from a 3D thing, like a real life model, they're standing in front of you. Is gonna make your understanding of perspective and this kind of tricks more hard to use, right? Because it's not too up to a 2D plane. Like your photos are flattened up, right? You have a 3D thing on a 2D surface, but in real life, you have that on 3D. It's real there, and you have to understand that every time you look down, then you look up. You may change the angle and everything on that, and that's going to change. So both of them works fine. One is harder, one is easier. I don't know if one is better than the other.
Yeah, I would
Well,
just, I want to just
yeah,
add to that. You're right. I would, you know, I was very tentative years ago to even teach online, quite honestly. But and the reason for that was I always taught in classrooms, and if there's any big difference, the major difference between drawing in a classroom with a model versus online is that you're going from reality and three-dimensionality to photography, right? And I think it takes a little bit more work on our part as artists to think about space and see space off a 2D photo than to see the full three-dimensionality of a model. You know, that is probably the toughest hurdle. So these tricks we're sharing with you today, these are awesome ones for you to bring to your awareness when you're looking at photographs or drawing from imagination to get more depth out of this two-dimensional monitor, right?
yeah. Okay. So this image you're watching on the screen right now, I posted today on my Instagram, just like a preview of what we're going to talk about today. And I think it kind of add the things Mike already explained, like size and like distance between one thing and the other. Where is my pencil? Here it is. So the distance get shorter, thing gets bigger. And here's another thing we're going to talk in a minute, like overlaps, like wrapping lines, showing the direction of the volumes, right, against size. And all things create like dilution. Once again, we're talking about dilution because this is a flat piece of paper, right? Here is flat, it's 2D. But your brain reading those tricks starts to make you believe that this is going inside the page, right? This is going out and this drawing is going in, like you're going inside the page, right? So you have to be aware of those tricks to create that illusion. So let me take where you left off, Mike, with sizes. Like, for example, we can have this square and this other square here. Okay, so we have these two objects, would be object 1 and object 2. What's, you can start thinking, okay, this is bigger, so this is closer, this is smaller, so this is further away. But the thing is, if object 1 is not equal to object 2, or we don't know what object it is, Mike talk about hands or feet that are the same size, we can relate this thing. Okay, so this is closer, this is further away. But if they're not, we have no idea which one is further and which one is closer. So there, when this thing appear, right? Because this, what we're drawing here could be just like this. This is object 2, and this could be object 1. So now what we find here is overlaps. And this is clear that object 2 is closer, or it's in front of object 1. That makes sense? I hope it does, because it's pretty clear, right? So what I want to talk about here is overlaps and this thing that we're going to talk, I call it T moment. You can call it however you want. There's this thing, and it's called T moments because it's a T, right? It creates a T. And the one thing to remember how this works is pretty easy. It's like every line, imagine this line is going that way. Every line stopping other line is going to be in front. Okay, this line is stopping this line for going further away. So that's going to create that this, it's in front of this. Okay, that's pretty simple. So that's our T moment. That's our overlap. So let me redraw this here so I can give you more tricks on that. So we have that square. Okay, that would be object 1. So we can have object 2 just using overlap. Okay, one is in front of the other, overlap. Another trick is things that are darker are closer. So if we make this line darker than this line, look at that, that illusion, it's better. This is closer than this. And there's another trick, we can make things going further away. And what is that? If we create aerial passages. I hope I'm spelling this, passages.
I think it's an A.
That is, what am I missing?
I think it's Passages.
Passages? Okay, there we go.
Yep.
I'm
curious. I don't know what an aerial passage is.
Is this. So you can see here is what when something can go in.
Right.
And can go out. So let me get rid of those lines. So look at this. The illusion of depth here is better. We have something that is further away. So if we increase a little bit more this, the darkness of this line, and we also add this here, it's further away. And if we break the line like this, and also use those passages, it's further away. So look at this, how we create that. We can even add like drop shadows and things to make the illusion bigger or greater. But look, the depth we create there, the illusion of depth, we're using those tricks like darker lines, lighter, aerial passages, and kind of this. line that I make a little like broken line, it could be really lighter. So even lighter than this one. So we go light. The lighter we go, the further away we feel that that object is. So here, I hope this makes sense. And if we go back to the drawing, you can see that this overlap here makes a lot of sense. Like you start feeling like this is closer than this, that this is closer than that this leg is further away, and it's behind the rear end, and we can go in deeper and deeper and deeper into the page, right? So when you're drawing any pose, you should be aware of what you want to show. And there was a question before in the chat asking about how can we reduce the amount of foreshortening when we're creating something from our imagination. So why would you? That was my answer to that, because if you are imagining something and you can make things up, for example, if I move this hand here and I can cover this rear end with the hand, that will make this drawing more with more depth, right? Because I'm creating a overlap here, and I'm making this hand feel really, really clear that this is in front of this, right? If I'm creating a pose, I'm taking this from imagination, I can do these kind of things, right? So that will help the illusion of perspective and depth of the drawing, because I'm using the tricks I was just mentioned. Like I'm using size, I'm using overlaps, I'm using the darkness of the line, and all of that, creating a more dramatic image. We really talk about drama in previous streams. Like there's one thing, contrast create interest, and overlaps, and this thing we talk about the darkness of the line against something more lighter is contrast. That this is contrast, and so we are adding contrast. We adding interest to the drawing. So you have to be aware of all those things to make your drawing even more attractive. Because we all want to make our drawing attractive. There's nobody wants to make a drawing. Oh, my drawing is not really attractive. It's just sax, and that's my idea, to make a drawing sax. So I don't know if there's any question there in the chat.
I can see the chat again, by the way.
Oh, awesome. So yeah, so coming back,
I think it's worth mentioning that these tricks are things that they all come from observation. You know, they're not things that we make up.
Right.
So it's based on truth. You know, we just have to see it in reality.
Yeah, learn how to translate it into line, right? It's like,
yeah, exactly.
Trying to take the language of seeing and how our brain perceives space. And as artists, what we're passing down from generation to generation of artists is, here's how the language of line works to define what we already see anyway, right?
Okay, so this thing, I know maybe at the beginning sounds really mathematical, and if you start drawing and you say, okay, I want to draw something like this, and it's coming here, and I want to add the arm go in here, so this should be darker and this should be lighter, and you start thinking about this, your brain is going to explode. So go slow, go step by step. First, understand what is going on with the things you're drawing, like the figure, understand the figure. So that is why we go into force, form, and shape, and anatomy in that order, to be able to understand, okay, what's the body's doing, how should I do this curve, and why this is going this way. And we have another thing called soft touch. That is really important for this because we need to start like soft, right? I hate doing this digitally. You know, I love pencil and paper because I can do that very easier. But if you if you start soft, then if you want to go darker, it's not a big deal. Any line I put here over this one, it will be darker, you know, and this will vanish to my eyes because this is darker, this is softer, and this will get really in front of that. One other trick I want to mention that it's important to know about depth is that a one-sided object like this, for example, cube or square, is gonna feel like behind of a two-sided object, right? This object automatically feel that is closer to us. Okay, and if we have like a three-sided object, like this one, look at this. This feel even closer to us. So when you're drawing something, that's why comics always get the hand of the superhero like this. Look how many sides I have on my hand, fingers. I have three sides everywhere, and my face just became like a simple shape right next to my hand, and that's also create like you have overlap. You have here overlap. You have this thing of the sides, like volumes, and of course you're gonna have something more contrasting on the hand than on the face, right? So this is a really nice trick, but once again, if you start thinking all of this at the same time and you want to play with these games, your brain is going to explode in a minute. So don't worry about it. Start using those things every now and then. And oh, look at this line. I can make it darker. Oh, look at this arm. I can start adding like surface line to make more clear than we have two-sided here. So it's closer. And start thinking and adding those little things here and there until it gets like second nature, and you just do it naturally because it will happen. Eventually, you doing one thing over and over and over again will make you make things automatically without thinking too much about it. There are 4 stages of learning, which is unconsciously. I don't know how to say this in English. Please help me, Mike, with this.
Sure.
You unconsciously,
Yep.
like you don't know that you don't know. Okay, you don't know that you don't know. For example, maybe some of you didn't know about this, some of you didn't know about this, so you don't know that you don't know that. Now you know that you didn't know that, so you know that you didn't know. Okay, this is the second stage. That is that you know that you didn't know. The third stage would be you know that you know. Is when you start to learning, you start to practice, and you start knowing something that you need to practice more to get the feel of it. And the fourth stage, which is the one we all want to know, you know that you know, so you don't even think about it. It's like riding a bike. When you go up to a bicycle and you start moving forward, you're not thinking about, oh, I need to balance. Now this foot, now this other one, now this foot, now this other one. You're not thinking about balance when you're riding a bike nowadays. You just ride the bike because it's second nature, because you already know, you know. So you just feeling it. Okay. So whenever you're learning something, you have to go through all of those stages and you finally reach mastery of whatever it is when you know that you know, and it's just happening. Okay. So all these tricks are things that you need to practice. And just because you hear it here, it doesn't mean your drawing is going to change after this stream. Okay, so practice, that's going to make things work.
So there's
yeah.
no magic?
Yes, there is magic, but magic works practicing. Yeah.
Good answer, Diego. Good answer.
All right.
So-
Well, thank you, Diego. That was awesome.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, I love the 4-stage thing. There was a little bit of back and forth on the chat about that. I think another term for that, Dion Mars mentions the idea of intuition, I would say that's where you're hitting intuition. It's intuitive now. That's when you know what you know and you know how to do it so well, to Diego's point, that you don't even think about it. It's like taking a shower, right? You don't think about taking a shower. You don't think about riding a bike. Even when you're driving, if you know where you're going, you don't think about how to get there. You just kind of do it, right? And it allows your mind to think about other things. So as you become intuitive about one thing, that allows you to bring in new topics, right? Sometimes one of the things we'll hear as force instructors, to Diego's point, is like, my brain's going to blow up because I have to think of all these things you guys are talking about. Well, you got to take one at a time, get to know it well enough where it doesn't have to be in the forefront of your mind. You can kind of push it to the back, and then you bring in the next idea in the front, right? And then that one slowly gets pushed to the back, and the next one comes to the front, and so on and so on, right? So you keep building up your intuitive ability,
Mike,
So
I have one thing I was thinking lately. I'm just going to throw it here. I didn't tell you about, but it's really good. It was really good. It's my thinking, so it's no. And it is. There's nothing impossible. We just don't know the method yet.
Yeah,
To me, there's nothing that is impossible. We just don't know the method of how to do it. And force is a method. So if you don't know how to draw and you learn force, you're gonna find a method to draw. So nothing is impossible. We just don't know a method to do it. And there are better methods and there's worse method. But if you have a method, you can do anything. That's magic. When we see something that is not, that we don't understand how it's possible to be done, we feel that it's magic. And once we know the method, it's no longer magic, but to be able to do magic, we need to be able to do and to use that method correctly. Okay, so I feel that is what it's for.
If you want to keep believing in magic, then you should stay ignorant.
Yeah, indeed.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. So if
and there's better magic, and that's magic that you don't understand, even if you're so wise. And that's beautiful.
No, it's true. Yeah, I mean, to close on that, I love that metaphor, the magic metaphor. If you want to stay in the world of thinking drawing is magic, then don't learn any of these things that we're teaching you. All right. And if you want to look behind the green curtain of the Wizard of Oz, well, then learn how to draw, and you'll realize there's no magic in any of this. It's just a lot of hard work. All right. Indeed. All right, guys. Thank you so much. That was awesome, Diego. Thanks for coming, Swenley. I'm glad that you were able to get in today. Hopefully, Mrityunjay will be feeling better, and we'll see more of him next week. I hope you guys enjoyed the stream today. We did get up to 104 likes, so that's awesome, right? We're closing in on that 150 again. And we will see you guys next week. Again, next week will be a critique week, right? So get your artwork into the Dropbox. I think I'm probably going to try to look for drawings that related to the subjects we've had over the last 3 weeks, right? So try to look at those videos prior to today's, do some drawing, get it into the Dropbox, and then we'll pick a bunch of art for next week's live critique. And then after that, we'll do a whole bunch of weeks of new lessons. As a reminder again, Josh Hunter Black interview, July 4th at 11 o'clock Pacific Standard Time. It's going to be a premiere event. So Josh will be there for you to chat to, right, and talk through the live chat. So please try to come and check that out. And we will all see you next Friday. Take care, everyone. Have a great weekend. Goodbye.
Yes. Bye, guys.
See you guys.
Bye. See you.